Welcome to another edition of Comet Algebra. This video is Algebra 1, Section 1.2, Opposites and Absolute Value. Starting with a couple definitions. You may be familiar when we use the word origin, we're talking about 0 on the number line. Opposite numbers are defined to be the same distance from 0, but going in opposite directions. For instance, if I asked what is the opposite of 42, you would say negative 42, and vice versa. Absolute value. Absolute value is defined to be the distance a number is from 0. And I underlined this word distance because when you're talking about a distance, it cannot be negative. You cannot travel a negative distance. Distance is always positive, and that really is another definition of absolute value, is to say always positive. A symbol for absolute value looks like this, 2 bars. For example, the absolute value of a negative 6, okay, a negative 6, think distance. How far is it from 0? Well, it is just 6 units from 0. So the absolute value of a negative 6 is a positive 6. Again, it's always positive. An example over here is asking us the absolute value of 10 minus 15. Well, in PEMDAS, you treat absolute value like it's parentheses, and you do what is inside the absolute value first. So in our example here, we would take 10 minus 15 first, which is negative 5. And after you're done with the operations inside the absolute value, that's when you take the absolute value of that number, and that would be positive 5. Now let's go back to what I said here. You treat them like parentheses except distribution. For instance, if you had a 2 and you were multiplying that times 8 minus 11, you do not ever distribute a number outside the absolute value to numbers that are inside the absolute value. So that's what I meant by you treat it like parentheses except distribution. So how you would do this, you, again, because it's like parentheses, do this operation inside the absolute value, leave this 2 alone, we'll just keep it there, 2 times 8 minus 11 is negative 3. Now after we take the absolute value of negative 3, then, which is positive 3, then we do our multiplying times 2 and get 6. So just to repeat, do not ever distribute a number outside the absolute value inside. It does not belong there. You do everything inside this first, and then you take care of any operations outside the absolute value symbols. All right, these next 2 definitions, just to make sure it's clear, we are talking about when we are on a number line, because we will be doing other definitions for distance and midpoint when we are on the XY coordinate plane. But this is just on a number line. And really, you already kind of know this. Like just for example, if A happened to be 10 and B happened to be, I don't know, 50, and I asked you to find the distance between them, you would know that you simply subtract. And most of you would automatically say 50 minus 10, and you'd say 40. They're 40 units apart. So that's where the subtract comes from. But what if we happen to go 10 minus 50 and get a negative 40? And we just learned a minute ago that distance is always positive. So the way that we can guarantee that this letter D, this distance, will always be positive if we use the absolute value. So that's where this formula comes from. Distance equals the absolute value of a minus b. This way it doesn't matter which way you subtract it, you're always going to get a positive distance. And now to find the midpoint, halfway between 10 and 50. Some people say, well, you could just take the distance and cut it in half. Well, think about that. If we took 40 and cut it in half, that would be kind of like right here, kind of close to 50. That doesn't give us the halfway point. So we can't just cut the distance in half. However, if we average the endpoints, we do get the midpoint. And this is just the formula for average, where you add two things together and divide it by 2. So that's where this formula comes from, that midpoint is a plus b over 2. So in my example here, the midpoint would be 10 plus 50 divided by 2. Half of 60 is 30. So it's 30 that would be exactly in the middle. And again, these are for 2 points on a number line. All right, now we'll just look at a few examples. If you were asked to state the opposite of 18, it would be negative 18. The opposite of negative 47, positive 47. If you were asked to evaluate the absolute value of negative 422, that would be positive 422. All right, in this example 4 then, you do need to subtract this first inside the absolute value. And if I subtracted those correctly, I got 37. And the absolute value of 37 is just 37. All right, in example 5, again we have to simplify inside this absolute value first. The absolute value of a negative 62 is a positive 62. This subtract sign is not inside of an absolute value, and so it doesn't change, it just stays a subtract sign. And the absolute value of 33 is 33. And so we need to just take 62 minus 33, and we get 29. All right, in this last example, we are asked to find the distance and midpoint between 12 and 52. So I did go ahead and I wrote down the formula for distance and the formula for midpoint. So distance, it says we subtract them and take the absolute value. So again, it doesn't matter which way you subtract these. You could have 12 minus 52 inside the absolute value. And then you'd get the absolute value of a negative 40, which is 40 units. Then when we do midpoint, we put in the 12 and the 52 for the A and the B. And it says to divide them by 2. So if we add those, 12 and 52 is 64. And if we divide that by 2, we get a midpoint of 32. All right, now you have the knowledge that you need to do section 1.2. Have fun with that.